Hi, my name's Sheehan, and today I'd like to talk about Mahler's First Symphony. And I'd like to go through this work exploring its structure, because I do believe that having some understanding where you are in a piece of classical music can greatly aid our appreciation and enjoyment of it, particularly in a long symphony like a Mahler symphony. Now, this symphony, Mahler's First, was written in 1888 by and large. It drew on earlier music Mahler had written, earlier sketches he'd written, but it had such a tortuous genesis, the symphony, and Mahler kind of tinkered with it loads. At some points he wanted it to have a program, i.e. he wanted it to express particular images or ideas. He gave it a nickname, the Titan, which was named after a Jean-Paul novel, but then he ditched that. So that this symphony, before it came to be what we know it today, had a rather difficult birth, let's say. It even had another movement called Blumina, about flowers, which eventually was lost in the final work, although you sometimes hear it performed with the rest of the symphony today, or on its own. But despite all the ins and outs of how it came to be, and if you want to read about that, look it up, it is an amazingly fresh and original symphony. This is a first symphony by such a unique and original voice. It just screams Mahler from the opening bars, and there's not a sense of Mahler finding his feet here. It very much is Mahler to the core right from the outset. Incidentally, the work was premiered in 1889, and it kind of mystified a lot of people, particularly in Vienna. And I think people thought Mahler was having a bit of a joke. But of course Mahler was being serious, and with a Mahler symphony you get the weighty symphonic arguments of Beethoven or Bruckner, but you also get this sense of the everyday world breaking in to his symphonies through village bands, klezmer bands, pop music of the day, schmaltzy waltzes or Ländler. And you can find that all in the First Symphony. And of course, Mahler draws on those inspirations from both highbrow art and more earthy sources for the rest of his musical output. But it's all there in the first. Such an amazingly original work. So it's in 4 movements. That's how it's come down to us in its standard form, and it begins with a sonata form movement, roughly, with a lengthy introduction. And the introduction is one of the most unforgettable moments in all of classical music, in my opinion. I think it's absolutely marvellous. We begin with these harmonics, and very high A's. Okay, and then over the top of that, this falling idea. And then these fanfares. Such an evocative opening to a work. It's absolutely beautiful and utterly spellbinding. And that falling idea, da, 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 you can trace back to perhaps Beethoven's 4th Symphony, the introduction to the first movement. And there's a very similar passage to that also in Brahms's 2nd Symphony, in the final movement, in the development there. So check that out. Mahler's one of these composers who did, if you like, magpie ideas, I think, from other sources and made them his own, as many of the great composers did, of course. So we have these eerie, ghostly fanfares going on, as well as that falling melody. We hear like a horn chorale come in, and then eventually we start hearing this creeping idea in the basses. It goes like this. And then we start to hear birds in the trees, including cuckoos and other trilling avian friends. So Mahlerian from the outset, so beautiful, so haunting, so evocative. It really is marvellous, the opening of the symphony. Then we come into the exposition. The exposition of this movement in sonata form is really based on one subject. It's pointless to divide this exposition into different subject groups because really there's just one theme which seems to permeate the entire section, which is this, which was based on one of Mahler's songs from the Songs of a Wayfarer. And the tune he takes from those songs is this. Already we've modulated to the dominant A major. And this exposition passage really just features that tune. There are some subsidiary ideas as well. This phrase. And then we have this other idea, which I always think sounds slightly oriental, rather pentatonic. Etc. Charming, innocent, joyful, playful, childish in a sense music. The exposition rotates these ideas before coming to a Codetta based on the main theme from the second song from the Songs of a Wayfarer, before the whole thing's repeated again. And the development harks back to the introduction, with those ghostly harmonics and that falling theme. The offstage fanfares, the birds, etc. It all comes back. There's this halting cello line that comes through as well. Something like that. You get this fantastically low F in the basses. Listen out for that. Then we come to this fantastically exciting and thrilling moment in this symphony. We come back to D major. D major. So beautiful, that moment. And before the development moves into more traditional territory, going to the material found in the exposition. Bum 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 bum. We go through a series of beautiful modulations. There's a beautiful one to D flat major. We hear this new idea here as well, which we hear in the finale as well. We first hear it in the second violins. And we get a hint of the march, which will be the first subject to the finale as well. Then we get to this incredible moment where the clouds are pierced and the sunshine comes through. We get this D major chord, we hear these fortissimo fanfares all around throughout the whole brass section. Incredibly exciting. here it is. I love the way those horns go there. Before we're led back to the recapitulation, where we just hear that those motifs from the Exposition, chief amongst them, etc. Then we have the Codetta again, based on that tune, which takes us to this incredibly witty, raucous and boisterous close. The second movement's really easy to follow. It's a ternary form piece, as you'd find in any symphony of Beethoven or Haydn, Schubert and Bruckner. Indeed, there are many parallels with Bruckner in this movement, but we begin with this rather earthy dance. A major. Etc. This is a real country dance, this A section to this dance movement. And there are a couple of other subsidiary ideas in this first section, but that's basically it. The trio is a rather lovely tune, a Ländler really. Lovely, charming music to have a sip from a glass of beer to. A real moment of relaxation before we go back to etc. Something like that. Back to the reprise of the A section. That's all that we need to say really about this this charming movement. The third movement is a funeral march, apparently inspired by a engraving called The Hunter's Funeral, whereby in a somewhat ironic way the hunted, the prey, the hares, the deer, all these animals killed by the hunter or threatened by the hunter are carrying the hunter aloft in his own funeral bier. Apparently this movement in particular was difficult for the original audiences to take, and it's a brilliant movement, but you can kind of see how shocking it must have been to some of the original listeners. I mean, to begin with, of course, it takes Frere Jacques, you know, and turns it into a minor mode tune, which is heard as a round. Heard famously on the solo double bass, of course. This forms the backbone of this funeral march movement. It's the recurring theme. Very kind of grotesque, very odd, but incredibly effective, so Mahlerian. We then have a subsidiary idea we first hear on the oboe. So on. So this funeral march goes along at this kind of mock solemn pace, and then Mahler throws us a complete curveball. We go into some Jewish klezmer music, which we hear on the oboes and the trumpets. And then we get the percussion coming in, almost like a one-man band meeting on the corner. Dum-ch, 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 dum-ch. Completely from a different place from the usual rarefied world of the Western art music tradition. So wonderful how Mahler combines these different elements from his experience. Brilliant. We have a brief reprise of the Frère Jacques tune before we come to a new idea in G major. Reminds me a bit of the Adagietto, this from the Fifth Symphony, the way that the harps come in, and the tune goes like this. Lovely music, beautiful. But then the music darkens again, and we come back to the funeral march again, this time in E flat minor. But at this end of the movement here, where we have a reprise of the funeral march and the klezmer music, you get a sense that the ideas from elsewhere in the movement are coming in. So amidst the minor Frère Jacques, we start to hear the klezmer music. And in the klezmer section, when we have a return to B, we're always reminded of the Frère Jacques tune. And then the movement ends with a coda based on the main Frère Jacques melody. The finale begins with a cry of pain, perhaps a little bit like the beginning of the final movement of Beethoven's Ninth. We're hurled headlong into the midst of a storm, into the maelstrom, and incredibly exciting stormy music. And we keep hearing these triplets, da 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 da, da 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 da, da da da, like fate hammering on the door, as such, to mixed composers. And then we have the first subject, which is this march, which has been hinted at in the first movement actually, which goes like this. Really exciting music. Music of struggle, music of a spiritual crisis. Hellish music, Inferno, that's the title, the original title of this movement. And this motif we've heard already in the first movement, in the development. So that gives a kind of a unity to the symphony as a whole. This storm then peters out and we come into a romantic second subject, very much like Tchaikovsky in the way it's scored. D flat major, and the tune goes like this. Lovely melody, really builds to a heady climax. And then we come to a development, a very long kind of episodic development, dealing with the march melody, the first subject to this movement, before we come to a new melody. Again, like the first movement, we have a glimpse of heaven through the storm. The clouds part for a moment and we hear this new idea. Which is loosely based on that introduction idea at the beginning of the first movement. And now it's almost sounds like church bells pealing out. This is the goal, the teleological purpose of this movement. We're going to hear it to thrilling effect right at the end. We have another ghostly section in this mighty development devoted to the music of the introduction to the first movement, before we have that beautiful Tchaikovsky melody, the second subject, which we heard earlier, before the grim march comes back. The recapitulation, the music full of stress and fire. But this time, as the first subject's recapitulated, Mahler does something interesting. He brings back music from the development of the first movement. A very ingenious way, really. Before the music erupts in a blaze of D major. And we have the Coda to end all codas. I remember seeing a performance of this by Ivan Fischer and the Budapest Festival Orchestra back in the proms quite a number of years ago. And the effect of this Coda was electric. The brass section stood up and the music was so full of triumph and joy, as if heaven had broken into the Royal Albert Hall that evening. It was such a remarkable experience, a spiritual experience. The symphony has ended in triumph. It overcomes this kind of spiritual crisis, particularly in this movement, and ends in pealing bells. And what a remarkable achievement Mahler's First Symphony is. Now, thank you for watching this. If this is your kind of thing, please click like and subscribe. If there's any pieces you'd like me to look at, please put them in the comments below and I'll add them to the list. Thanks for watching. Bye.